Holy cow. Andy Stumpf, CEO of Black Rifle Coffee. It's great to have you here.
It's good to be back on the podcast that my company owns. It's no big deal.
So, those of you that don't know Andy, he came up with this joke. Shoot, this was probably
it might actually have been longer than that.
Was this a year ago?
Yeah.
Really? But it's super funny. Go ahead and tell him your joke. That's actually I'm part of.
I mean,
now.
You describe it as super funny, but I think that only applies to you and I. Basically, before, I think I had been part of this joke before I actually told you about it. I might have told you about it just to come clean in case somebody came up to you and was like, "Hey, I was on an airplane with this dude." So it all starts with, I travel a substantial amount for work, and this is literally the first shirt on the top of the pile today. So I was wearing a Black Rifle shirt on an airplane, and I don't know what it is about airports, but people are like, they're like, "Oh, hey man, I love that coffee." And I'm like, okay, but if I was wearing a Rip Curl shirt, would you be like, "Hey dude, I love those surfboards too"? It's bizarre. And they'd always want to talk about the coffee. And finally I just started fucking with people, which is my favorite hobby. I'm like, "Oh yeah, thanks man. That's why I started the company." And they're like, "No way, dude, you started Black Rifle?" I was like, in the moment, I was like, "Yes, I did." So, and I don't know how many times it usually happens when I'm boarding an airplane. The people will point at the shirt and go, "Hey man, I love that coffee." I'm like, "That's awesome. My name is Andy and I founded it, and I founded it for you." And eventually it happened enough times I had to tell you, and thankfully you thought it was hilarious. So now we've joined forces and tell everybody that I'm the CEO, and it freaks some people out, and you and I get to laugh our asses off.
Yeah, once you told me, I think you told me when Andy and I were hunting.
Oh, that was when I told you.
And we were getting ready for a podcast, Cleared Hot, which is Andy's podcast, but you guys probably already listened to it. And he's like, "Hey, by the way, I've been telling people for like a year that I'm the CEO. Should I just get a discount code?" And I was like, "Oh yeah. So what? I forget what's the discount code."
I think it's Andy.
Andy CEO.
You did it right there on your phone. Like when we were talking, it was awesome.
Yeah. So now when Andy uses the discount code, or people will ping me and comment in some of the posts that I make and some of the other stuff, it'll be like, "That's really cool. Too bad that you're not the real CEO. We all know that Andy is." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right."
Dude, I got a good one. I'll read you an email that I literally got. It was like, "Black Rifle's customer service is savage." Because somebody referenced that I said, I can't find it right now. They basically wrote into Black Rifle and like, "Andy said I get a free t-shirt," and your customer service department was like, "You can hit up Andy about the shirt. I'm sure he's got an extra small for you." I'm like, "Yep, that sounds about right."
Oh man, they're doing it right.
I love it.
Commander's guidance. Yeah, they're doing it right. There are times when I've heard you talk about customer service to the team here at Black Rifle, and you're like, "Hey, you guys can dial it up, man. We're not a PC company." I've heard you say that multiple times.
Try to get them outside of the box. They're resistant, but they'll get there. So,
interesting factoid. Now that we've changed out of Andy CEO. I think it's Andy CEO 20 or something like that. We'll put it in the comments feed. So Zach, make sure that we get that taken care of. But so interesting fact, Free Range American was Andy's and John Dudley's. They started it. When did you guys start?
I actually remember the initial conversation, and it was, I think, the very first time that I went to, it was either the first trip to Dudley's house or the second time that I was there. His wife, Sharon, Sharon and Dudley are like the nicest people on the face of the planet. I get this question all the time. Yeah. Is Dudley as nice as he seems? It's like, no, he's actually somehow way nicer. They're just so generous with their time and knowledge. And they were making a shirt for Knock On that was like an evolution. It started off with like an ape, and then it went to a spear and a bow, which they took a ton of shit for. Yeah, I have it too. It's an amazing shirt. But it just blows my mind how people, and this is a total aside from the story, it's like they look at that as like some religious statement as opposed to oh my God, they took so much shit for that. because it was like, how could you do this? Like, that's not where humans came from. They became a statement of belief to people.
Okay.
But I remember it because she was working on that shirt design, and Dudley and I were shooting in his backyard on his grass, and we were talking about T-shirts. And I said to him, you should make a knock-on shirt that says Free Range American. And he was quiet for a minute, and he was thinking about it. And he's like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm like, a shirt, like everybody always talks about being free, but let's not talk about being free. Let's go do and execute all these cool freedoms that we have. Let's just go out and do cool shit that we love doing, exercising our freedoms. And the shirt can be a celebration of that. And he thought on it a bit more, and he goes, that's not a T-shirt. That's a brand in and of itself. And that's where it all started. I mean, that was probably my only productive and creative input into it, because he's so creative when it comes to design. He basically took it from there. But that's how it all started, was off of that. And then we grew it. I mean, obviously, we both knew you at that point, and we kind of grew it and realized through conversations that it was just such a better fit for the Black Rifle umbrella, because you guys are doing exactly those things, and Dudley and I's microphone to the world is limited in scope and size in comparison to what you guys have. Is just such a better fit.
Well, I think, too, it's good because it's a partnership now, right? It's like we've combined our forces. So Black Rifle Coffee, Andy and John, we're all part of the same company, FRA. We've been running that podcast, which was good because it came at a really good time for us, because we wanted to branch out and do things that were more inspirational. They were emphasizing more about America, the freedoms that we so clearly enjoy. And so it came at this really cool time. And I think we were talking about it at TAC is when we really started getting into the nuts and bolts of it. And it's like, man, let's just figure out a way that we can get this thing all together. And now we have the initial owner of Free Range, and then now partner with Andy, John, myself, and all the guys at Black Rifle. But I'm super excited, man, because it's going to be an incredible year for, I think, Cleared Hot. Your podcast is, it seems like it's growing. Every time I log into YouTube, every time that I see another video, it seems like it's growing. And I think you're getting better, because I remember listening to some of your interviews, and please don't take this the wrong way. A couple of your interviews 3 years ago or 2 years ago when you first started versus the interviews that you're doing now, they're way better.
Well, you practice anything, you're probably going to get better at it. And I'm more comfortable, probably with myself now. One of my initial hesitations in starting the podcast to begin with is I'm not a huge fan of doing things that are public facing. I'm probably my own worst marketer. And the idea of like, I'm going to record my voice and my thoughts and just go ahead and release that to the hounds of the internet, that sounds like a fucking nightmare, And then you start doing it, and it's like, oh, well, I get to talk to interesting people about things that interest them, and it's not actually about me. So I would only hope that it would be substantially better, and then it would continue to do so. And it's a weird time, right? Like, in most places, people are locked down, so the demand for digital content is high. So there's certainly some, if not many, positive things that will come out of the bizarre time that we're navigating our way through.
Yeah, that's such a complex statement to try to unpack. And, it's so interesting. Matt and I were just talking about this today before I jumped on this podcast. We're talking about something about, podcasts and YouTube comments or whatever it is. And really, we're getting into like this entire idea that we can't really look at comments, because like, if you're going to tune in and listen to us for any reason whatsoever, that's great. I'm not a subject matter expert in jack or shit typically. For me, I was a tactical guy for the majority of my years. I was roasting some coffee. I started a company. And it's not as if it's been just happenstance. This is what I wanted to do, but I'm not a constitutional scholar.
No shit.
I can't talk about these things. I'm so far down the rabbit hole with what's happening with COVID.
Yeah.
I have a company of 240 people. You have a company of 240 people that I have
you're
to
the figurehead
be part of. but I don't have time to get into the nuts and bolts of the internet alleys, I guess. And I think the easier it makes it easy for me to just say, you know what, we're going to put out content. If people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. Just unsubscribe. If you don't like it, just unsubscribe or don't watch it. It's meant for people that enjoy it. If you don't like it,
yeah, it's voluntary to
basically.
participate. I was having this conversation earlier today. I don't consider myself to be a subject matter expert or have enough knowledge on any single topic where I can make these grandiose statements that people seem to be making. You know, like they're
Right.
These definitive statements. I actually, in everything that I've ever done in my life, I don't think I have enough knowledge or experience to make a single definitive statement on any topic. And it baffles me how people with an internet connection in 5 minutes on Google will often take the other approach on the internet. I mean, and I don't know about how you feel, but I actually enjoy challenging my beliefs. I seek out often other opinions. I'm open to having my beliefs change, as they have changed throughout the course of my life.
Sure.
But goddamn, man, you give somebody an internet connection and a little bit of social detachment from having to make that comment directly across face to face from somebody, and it turns into just a dumpster fire of all dumpster fires. And I think you have to be very careful navigating your way into that pig pen.
I couldn't agree more. I think, even navigating it, it's funny. Matt and I were talking about this because we were talking about it in the context of, it's easy for you guys because we're in a company. I'm like, yeah, but it's a company that I built from my garage. My dad was a logger. Yeah. But I wasn't a Trustafarian. What are you talking about? It's complete insanity where, not that, like I said, I don't even want to turn this into a negative diatribe. It's more about, for us, and we really did focus on this conversation today. We're like, this is all about positivity. This is all about trying to inject inspirational stories, a little bit of humor. And really, this is a bunch of former knuckle-dragger, tactical idiots having a conversation. It's nice because I get to kind of detach from some aspects of the company, and I can plug into a conversation with my friends and just be a friend in a friendly conversation and talk about specific topics. That's the thing I think about when I look at these podcasts that I really, really like and I get into. It feels like you're part of the conversation, right? If you have an IQ above, I think, Neanderthal, which it's actually smarter than Homo sapiens, but that's a different podcast conversation. I'm still waiting for the people with Neanderthal genes to get reparations because the Homo sapiens took all their land. But I'm just waiting for that. I'm waiting for people to be like, hey, this is an evolutionary injustice. We got to get our land back. I mean, I think it wasn't Rogan that has like 5% Neanderthal or something like that.
95% Neanderthal.
He was talking about.
That dude is basically, I mean, you put some hair on his face in a weird location, and you could put him right in a zoo at one of those exhibits. Yeah,
he's there. So, but what we were talking about was like injecting these conversations into the American public and allowing people to just be part of this conversation. And then if you don't like it, just opt out. At the end of the day, that's the beauty of America. You can just say, fuck it, I'm out of here. It's not a big deal. And for you and I, we have these long conversations depending on the time of day, week, month, whatever it is. Even going into this, you and I were having this conversation about the pandemic. Nobody really knew what was going on, what we were going to do with our families, because you're traveling to LA to be on Rogan's show, and the things that we were talking about were how does this affect the blood banks in America? How is this affecting the health professionals?
Or the elderly?
It's a politics aside.
I actually brought that up on Joe's show, talking about that, because I was thinking about that in context of what the national narrative was. And I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about the national narrative since then. It's just, I look at the information that people consume, and it's got to be in the high 90th percentile of negative and flashy. And that informs how they behave in the rest of their life. They're being bombarded with things that are catchy. They seem overwhelming. They're negative. And then, they turn around and their shit's falling apart in their real life. And to me, that's an easy breadcrumb connection. And I wish that more people could make it.
For those that don't know, Andy, you're
medically retired.
Yeah. Medically retired. And that was not something that you wanted to do?
No, it was not. I actually was 5 days from just straight up separating, and a doctor would not sign my discharge physical.
Right.
And at that moment I was very pissed. And now after the process played itself out and I actually get disability money, I'm like, oh, hey, thanks, dude. That was awesome.
Right. So he basically
100%.
squared you away.
Yeah.
Which is
I've
good.
Needed that.
Yeah,
I've needed that at every ladder rung along the way. Years ago, I was on Jocko's podcast and he was like, what rank did you get in the most trouble at? And I was like, all of them. And he just looked at me and shook his head. He's like, yeah, that sounds about right. I'm like, hey man, you and I have a different approach to life. It's all right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to me because those of you that know Andy and listen to his podcast, he's exactly the same. So you're kind of an asshole depending on the circumstance, right? When we first met several years ago, I think it was Baker that might have introduced us.
Probably, yeah.
It was Baker. Yeah, it was Baker. And Baker's brief to me was, Andy's an asshole, so you guys should get along really well.
I just dislike Baker, most of Baker, like 97% of who Baker is, I dislike at a very deep DNA level. So I'm an asshole to him.
I mean, I think he's easy. Right, which you're not. You're not an asshole whatsoever. You have a very specific demeanor, and I like the way that you engage with people. It's funny because I'm going to have to go back and listen to that podcast with you and Jocko because now, how long?
It was like
how
number
long was that?
64 or something. It was early on. It was like maybe he'd been doing it for a year. Pre the studio he's in now. It was a while ago.
How does he keep it up, man? Like what's like 4:30 a.m. every day?
There are some people, and I'm sure you knew people like this that can function like that.
Right.
I think the danger is people who are not able to function like that, trying to force their life into that. Like some people just need more sleep. I mean, wake up early and work out. That's an awesome message. I can't follow. Well, I go back and forth. I'll follow his Instagram for a little bit and then he makes me feel bad. So I unfollow him. And then I'll follow him a little bit and I'll make a few snarky comments on Instagram, which is what I think Instagram is for. Like, look at my watch. I got up at 11:30, a reasonable hour, and, but I mean, his message is great, but to me, everything in moderation is a little bit more how I live my life on those fronts.
Well, it's interesting because you've been able to take a very different approach. You've got a very successful podcast. You've been able to accomplish a fuck ton. So when you look at Andy, and he's probably one of the most humble guys that I know, actually, because when you look at his entire resume, it doesn't sound like the guy that you're talking to because he's not going to take credit. He's not going to tell you all the great things that he's done. But that's one of the things I really wanted to talk to you today was when you first got out of the Navy, which was what year?
Last day of June 2013. So coming up on 7 years.
So you've been out for 7 years. Did you have a pilot's license then?
Yes. No. I got my pilot's license, my private pilot's license in 2007, early 2007. So I left development group and I checked into BUDS, which for people listening stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL. It's the entry pipeline to becoming a SEAL. You're not a SEAL at the end. It's the opening of the door, not the arrival at the objective.
Right.
And they, for years, and I suspect the SF world has probably done this. They're always trying to figure out ways to fuck with attrition. Like, we need more guys, so let's change this aspect of training. So I checked in as a BUDS instructor. They're like, oh, we're getting rid of Winter Hell Week this year. I was like, what? So I checked in and they had nothing for me to do for like 3 to 4 months. So we were living in Santee, California, and there's a small airfield there. And I was driving home and I see this little Cessna, 150 or like 182. obviously being flown by a student pilot. And by that, it looked like it was going to crash and cartwheel in a fucking ball of fire down the runway. And it's like, meow, 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 meow. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So I took a left and literally drove to the flight school. I'm like, I would like to learn how to be a pilot. And I did a lesson that day. I had made up my mind. Yeah, I'm dead serious. This is exactly how this happened. So I literally watched this guy almost crash. I'm like, that's awesome. Had time to make the exit, drove to the flight school. It was the California Flight Academy. And I was like, I'm here to be a pilot. And they took me up and I flew a plane around. And then I was the asshole getting ready to, because they're like, here, get in the left-hand seat. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not qualified to do any of this. So the private pilot's license is very easy. It's maybe, I think I got mine in 40 hours, which is totally normal. It's in the knowledge level for a private pilot doesn't have to be huge because you're not really doing cross-country stuff very much. You're not flying in instrument conditions. It's sunny out. You can see where you're going. You can go fly around. And most people are flying in a little Cessna, like a Cessna 182. So, and then I just shelved it. I didn't really fly at all. And I started working for CrossFit shortly thereafter. And Greg was living in Prescott, Arizona, but he was driving back and
That's the founder of CrossFit.
Greg Glassman, founder of CrossFit. Surprisingly enough, CrossFit was founded in the town that I was born and raised in Santa Cruz. I had no idea when I started doing it, but the gym was about 8 blocks from my parents' house. So he had a house in Santa Cruz. He had a house in San Diego. And he had a house in Prescott, and just driving back and forth. And if you've ever done that drive, it's going to be 8 to 10 hours, depending on what time you hit it. And he did that for a few years. And I think it was 2010, around 2010, maybe 2011. He calls me and he was like, hey, you have your pilot's license, right? And I don't even remember telling him that I had my pilot's license. But I was like, yeah. I was like, well, I had it. I mean, I haven't flown in years. He's like, okay, cool. Start training again tomorrow. I'm tired of this goddamn drive from Prescott to California. So get all your ratings. Here's the CrossFit credit card, and we're going to buy an airplane. I'm like, okay, giddy up. So the next day I went to Montgomery Field and basically had to get recurrent again. And then I got my instrument rating, my multi-engine, my commercial. Then I got type rated in the Gulfstream G4, got my Citation 525S type rating, and then my ATP. All in the span of like 2 years. It was awesome. I flew a Gulfstream in the left seat with 486 hours of total flight time.
Which, you and I have talked about this, which is complete insanity because weren't you going or arriving at either commercial or instrument? You had the least amount of hours.
I don't know about that. So when you go to get a type rating, the Gulfstream was like 4 weeks, and it was at Flight Safety up in Long Beach. And, you know, the first thing they're doing is like, it was a class of like, I think 10 people. And of course they do the class intro. And as soon as they said they were going to do that, I'm like, well, this is about to get awkward immediately. Because these people are like, I've been a corporate pilot for years. I have these various type ratings. I have 6,000 hours. And of course, I'm fucking last. I'm sitting in the back right of the room. And they're going around. And the average flight time in that room was 5,000 hours. And it gets to me. I'm like, hey, my name's Andy. I like long walks on the beach, and my favorite color is blue, and I have 480 flight hours. And they were just like, what? And nobody thought I was going to be able to do it. And aviation is like ridiculously checklist based, and it's all systematic, which guess what? Plays directly into my wheelhouse. I'm really good at following instructions. So I did exactly what the checklist said, and I would study for the tests, and I passed. And it wasn't that hard. And it's crazy because you go to get these type ratings and you're flying a video game. I think it's a level D simulator. So all the buttons have to be in exactly the correct location. They have to function as they do in the aircraft. It's a full motion simulator. It's crazy. And they get in there and they just start going nuclear on your ass. Every red fucking light is going off. But the cool thing about a Gulfstream is it's a mandatory 2 pilot. So if you're the guy in the left seat, you can just load share all that stuff to the other guy. They're like, hey, make that red light stop blinking, Jeeves. You know, and you're just sitting there flying your airplane. So I graduated that. And with 486 hours, I was like taxiing in the left seat, just flying this Gulfstream. We went out, flew to, and it was just to go actually do a flight in the actual airplane. So we took off from Carlsbad, went over
Right.
to an airport just south of Palm Springs, did a landing, taxi back, took off, and then I landed that thing at the Carlsbad Airport, which is a ridiculously short runway for an aircraft of that size. And I had 0.6 hours of total flight time in it at that time. And then started doing Part 135, which is charter. So I flew that thing to Hawaii a bunch, to Canada, to Mexico, to Turks and Caicos, to the Bahamas. Like, it was nuts. I flew Dr. Dre back from Vegas one time to Van Nuys. Yeah, it was great.
Are you serious?
I was the right seat pilot, so I was given the brief, and I closed. You close the door, and there's seats right there, and he was sitting right there. And they don't usually give you their real first name; they'll change the name right at the end because the manifest has to be correct. And I forget what his actual name is.
Right.
But I'm like, hey, here's the emergency exits, and this, that, or the other. And I'm like, hey, if there's a medical emergency, I'm gonna let you have it, sir, because you're the only doctor on board. And he cracked up laughing, and I hopped in the seat, and we flew him to Van Nuys, and it's like, it was just bizarre. I mean, I was flying. It was ridiculous. Nobody thought that I was going to be able to do it. And they think that it's like some ridiculous, insurmountable feat. All I did was just follow checklists and just follow the procedures. I mean, I wasn't up there making anything up. I'm like, oh, these are the rules. These are the procedures. All right, let's execute. That's all it was.
And then how long did you do, or how long were you a pilot after that?
Probably 2 or 3 years after that. I was flying a lot. Forward
and that was full time. That's what you were doing.
So I was still working for CrossFit. So I was managing their licensing and sponsorship and charitable initiatives. So, the partnership with Reebok and CrossFit, I was sitting at the table when that deal was signed and negotiated.
Right.
And I was Greg's pilot, so I was flying him around. And then I would do the Part 135 stuff, which is just, basically on-demand charter operation. Somebody calls and says, hey, we need this plane to go there.
Right.
I would do that. They had 3 pilots, and of course you need 2. So we would rotate through, and I would take the trips that I could take on times when Greg didn't need me. So I was doing them simultaneously.
Wow. So you were basically, as my dad would say, busier than, a man in an ass kicking contest, a one-legged man in an ass kicking contest, because it sounds like you were super busy. And at that point, CrossFit was on a meteoric rise.
Yeah.
Right? That thing was just not only, you couldn't really classify it as takeoff. The thing
I think when I started working for them in late 06, early 07, like they were on the launch pad, but the smoke was already coming out of the missile. In 2010, when they signed with Reebok, and it became like a massive on cable television on ESPN. I mean, they were outside of Earth's orbit at that point. I mean, things were seriously, they probably took off, like the rocket cleared the pad before signing with Reebok. But after that, I mean, it was just on its way out of the atmosphere.
Yeah. And at that point I was relatively new. I think in 2006, 2007, I was doing CrossFit up in North Seattle. That was like the first gym in Seattle. It was started by a former Marine, and it was in this old naval warehouse.
Perfect.
Super cool. It was such a cool place to work out. It's so funny because I showed up there. My buddy we had done some CrossFit workouts in 2002, 2001 when we were at Fort Bragg, because my buddy had this shirt and it was this
Pukey
clown puking.
I have a skydiving canopy that has that on the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm talking to my buddy. I'm like, what is this shirt? I don't understand what you're wearing. This is a clown puking. And then he described it to me. So then I went and got into Pavel's videos. I was flipping around kettlebells, and I met Jeff Martone, and I was before Jeff was the CrossFit kettlebell guy. And then when I went and did that workout, it was so funny because I remember showing up there and going, I'm pretty fit. I don't know.
I hope you guys are ready to get smoked.
Yeah. And it was 3 events. So it was row, deadlifts, and I think a sandbag something or other, one of those big sandbag things. And I left there with when you've been breathing so hard and you're at VO2 max, because as I'm sure you are, I'm a very competitive person. So I'm trying to beat the fictional time of whatever time that is. So I'm rowing as fast as I can. I don't know how to pace myself. Like it's the first time I've ever been on a rowing machine,
maximum
I'm going to
effort.
do maximum effort, which is not sustainable for 5 minutes or whatever it was. And I left there and my mouth tasted that tin that when you're at VO2 max for so long, tastes kind of
battery
like
acid.
You've got blood, battery acid, whatever that is. Yeah, it tastes like battery acid. You're right. And but then I was hooked for several years after that. Every place we went, whether I was in Jalalabad or my buddy and I don't know if you know him, V Diamond. He and I were rotating in and out of Kabul, and he had a CrossFit gym in Salt Lake. That's one of the reasons that I got here, actually. So it's so funny because here you are working at CrossFit in the same years. I've been kind of weaving my way through these kettlebells and Martone and all these people, because when we first met, we played the name game for probably an hour, and we still played the name game, and we must have missed each other like ships in the night multiple times. And
that experience you're talking about of a guy who walks into the gym for fill in the blank, like, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a fill in the blank, generally some high speed operator, and leaves with their tail just completely tucked, because you look at just, it's 21:15:09. Oh, what are we going to do after that? It's like, no problem. And then they just get humbled. That actually was probably the best calling card for that program in the early days, because it hooked so many people who were like that, who were competitive. And if you think about it, the Spec Ops community or the SWAT community or the LEO, for better or worse, a lot of people look at them as inspirational or aspirational. But those communities are also full of A-type people that are trying to destroy themselves for fake points in time. So that program, they find that, they're like, oh, this is amazing. They dive in. And I think that was really a lot of the initial building blocks that ignited that fire underneath the CrossFit rocket.
It had to be. Every one of my friends that I knew, depending on where we were, if we were traveling or doing something, there was a kettlebell, there was a CrossFit workout. And the thing that I loved about it when we were deployed was we were working out together and we compete against each other. Yeah. It was super fun, right? So people that like to compete, it's really fun. Now, obviously, if you like to lose, it's not as fun. But I think for us, those were some of the great days that I remember downrange with guys that are probably still rotating in and out, to be honest with you, was just trashing ourselves on a C2 rower with a beat up kettlebell that we had loaded in a shipping container and shipped out into the middle of nowhere at 138 degrees in Basra, just shredding our lives. And then I got into Jim Jones.
Not to interrupt you, he was my introduction to CrossFit. So I'm trying to rehab from getting hurt overseas. And I bring him out to do a Jim Jones seminar, the first one that was done at that command. And there was like 7 of us in the room who all really kind of dug in on it. And me and one guy in particular, Steve Sanders, he was on my podcast. We went deep. And we'd be like, we would be pushing like razors. He'd be, sitting in the driver's seat and just putting it in neutral. We're driving it around, climbing ropes. We're just annihilating ourselves while people in the gym just sculpting their guns and working on their obliques, looking at us like, what in the fuck is wrong with you two? But those experiences with him, like, oh my God, man, we go out to jump trips in Arizona at the facility, and we'd be there at 3 a.m. doing jumps. And then we'd go crush ourselves running sprints up the tower. Kettlebells, the same thing. And then it's funny to see how now that's kind of just basically the now normal template for those types of organizations. Yeah. Because I remember when it was the opposite, and people would literally pull me aside afterwards and be like, hey man, like, is everything okay in your life? Like, is everything going okay? Like, you seem to have like a lot of excess energy and rage. What's wrong? I'm like, no, man, I'm just trying to get in shape.
Just trying to
But
get
Dwight
in shape,
was,
man.
I mean, fuck, Dwight's gym, originally Jim Jones was a CrossFit affiliate. And it's, again, this this network and nucleus of people that many of them have splintered out, but that connectiveness is so cool.
Yeah. Mark Twite's going to be on the podcast next week. So Trevor Thompson, myself, and Mark are going to be on a podcast. Funny short story with Mark. He wrote a book called Kiss or Kill: Confessions of a Serial Climber way back in the day. Phenomenal book. And I went to one of his book signings in Seattle in the 90s, like in 97. I was one of 6 people there, depending, right? Because it's all mountaineer.
It was like fringe,
weirdos.
Counterculture, metal, yeah.
So fringe.
Fuck you and fuck the rope. I climb because I want to, not because you like it. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that pejoratively. I love that dude. He is fucking awesome.
Yeah. No, he's awesome. So I read his book. Then I saw he was doing a book signing in the Mountaineers, which his book was incredible. I would still recommend it today. It stands the test of time. It's awesome. And here's this guy because, as I was getting into mountaineering, I think in the late 90s, Mark was the guy. He still is, actually. He's about the only guy left that's still alive that hasn't died in the mountains.
And he probably is that guy because he made the decision to back off when he did. Yeah.
And he's had... So meeting him back in the 90s, then fast forward when I realized this was Mark Twite that ran Jim Jones, and then having Jim Jones in Salt Lake City, Utah, which was another connection with my buddy V. It was so random and weird, but Mark he's this eclectic and he's a complete anomaly of an individual. He's a perfectionist. There's absolutely zero doubt in my mind that he's a perfectionist.
In so many ways. In so many aspects.
Right? Yeah. In so many ways. He is truly a remarkable human. There are very few humans that I think meet and exceed the level of standard that Mark Twite has on a wide variety of topics. He's a professional IPSC shooter. He was a mountaineer. He started Jim Jones. The guy is an incredible photographer.
Endurance athlete, writer, cyclist.
Anything and everything. Endurance, yeah. Anything the guy does, he goes 1,000%. These are the guys when late 90s, early 20s, those are the guys I was looking at going, that's the kind of guy I want to be, right? That is the guy I want to be. I don't want to be this other guy. There's a million different templates of people that you could look at to aspire to be, but Mark was the guy I was looking at going, I want to be like Mark Twite. That's the kind of guy I want to be.
Too bad there's only one.
So too bad there's only one. So when I met him in Salt Lake, last year, he had another book signing, and Sean Evangelista and Trevor and everybody went over there. And I met him again. I told him this story. It's like, whether you know it or not, you've been hugely inspirational in my entire life. I've watched what you've done. I read your books. I've read your blogs. I've consumed so much of your information that you've had this huge impact on my life. But you don't know who the fuck I am. You don't remember me, but you've been a huge inspiration in my life. He's like, man, that really, you could see that it really meant a lot to him that I even said that. Not because I'm important. It was just, I don't know if a lot of people tell him that, but that guy's touched so many people with what he's done. The cool things that he does, he creates exclusivity around what he's doing because he doesn't want dirt bags in his life. It's amazing. Jim Jones was invitation only. It was run out of his garage.
It was the Fight Club of
only
gyms.
Yeah. It was the Fight Club
I bet
of gyms.
And it's funny having somebody in your life that has that much impact that is actually ridiculously detached from you in every single way. You're pursuing the things that they do and following in their path, but they don't even know about it. I bet you now, given what you are doing to include this podcast, I bet you get messages like that often.
Yeah, I get a lot of guys. coffee roasting. Guys are always asking me questions about coffee
Well, I guess
roasting.
my point is it's interesting now, given the more digital mediums, the breadth and depth scope.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't consider myself to be anything or anybody, and I'll get messages occasionally like, "Hey, your podcast helped me through a difficult time," or listening to you talk about the SEAL community like it has impact on people's life that I didn't intend for it to do that, but I think it's awesome that the barriers to having that happen have been reduced.
I struggle with it. I do, even with the company. I have to remind myself all the time that I'm in a position of leadership. I have to, act and behave a certain way, not because I'm forcing the circumstance. It's mainly around narrative. I don't find myself very inspirational in just the day-to-day communication. I don't communicate very well as most people have told me because I'm an action-based person, right? Which, for me, I have to remind myself to thank people. It's not that I'm not thankful. It's just I always lean back on this idea. Well, why do people even care about hearing from me? I don't consider myself even smarter than the average bear. The only thing that I know really that I'm halfway decent at is I can outwork people.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So it's just like
that's a superpower in and of itself. And I am, trust me, I have the paperwork to prove that I'm not smarter than the average bear. And I've come to the conclusion that you don't have to be, because I mean,
right.
Not that I think people should shoot for being average, but if you can be consistently average, you're actually going to outdo most people.
Right. Well, I say it all the time. I give people this advice in the context of, listen, I've hired a lot of contractors over the last few years because of the expansion of Black Rifle. And I use this analogy because I think a lot of people can really relate to it, which is the contractor that shows up on time every day and just does what they say they're going to do for the bid price that they say they're going to do it in, continues. They're rock stars. You will have all the business you ever needed for the entire of your professional existence
by doing what you say.
Under promise and over deliver. Yeah, just by doing what you say. And I talk to people about this only in the context of life in general, saying I don't find myself that inspirational under, with a mic. I don't even try to be inspirational. I don't. I just go out and do the things that I like to do, that I'm very interested in, that I can continue to dive into and find energy out of. It's really easy for me to be connected in with my family and my kids. Super easy. I'm not trying to be, when I say this, I'm not trying to inspire people to be a great dad. I'm just trying to be a great dad for my kids. I'm not trying to write dad blogs, and I'm not discrediting people that are doing that. I'm just trying to be a great dad for my kids. I'm trying to be a better husband. I'm trying to be a good CEO. That's debatable, right? I mean, it's very debatable across the board, but there are a lot of other things that you take on in life. And I've had these conversations with people. I like to take on long, extensive projects that require years of development, because the things that you can just learn like that typically don't really interest me. There has to be a significant barrier of entry. So for instance, you and I, you guys were really, I think that the big jump in evolution to my archery because of what you and John were doing. I was shooting my trad bow before, and I didn't want to get into this compound archery world because I was scared of all the fucking whiz bangs and bells all over those things, dude. It didn't make sense to me. Like, why do you have all these wires on this thing, and you've got limbs everywhere,
all connected to one thing? Is
optics.
It just wrapped around? No, I get it. I tell you what, though, I wish you would have missed that shot on that pig, your first pig. I was trying to get in your head.
So he's behind me. Andy and I, we started I guess you started probably a year and a half before me. And then I got my bow, and then we linked up. So we went on my first real hunt with a compound bow. Andy's behind me. I've been walking. I walked 50 plus miles before we even got close enough to see this pig, by the way. Yeah. I'm like, man, this archery shit is no joke.
And thankfully Dudley was there because they were down in that hole. And since he's a giant, he was able to see down on them. Otherwise, we probably would have walked right past them.
Yeah, or scared him off, right? We would have like walked into him. So, okay, they're right up here. And I come to full draw. Andy's right behind me with the camera and his voice going, what were you?
That's exactly what I said.
You're whispering like, don't fuck this up. And I'm trying to sneak up on these pigs at full draw, and I'm trying as hard as I can to be as sneaky as I can. I'm thinking, oh, these pigs are going to find me at any point in time. I just got to shoot. And John's trying to nudge me, get closer. And I had the one that I wanted. I threw it up and over the one's back, down into the other one. And Andy and John made fun of me for, I would imagine they're still making fun of me. It was like, man, your hand was shaking like a dog shit with razor blades. And I'm going, yeah, it was a full draw for like 2 minutes, man. Like,
it was so awesome. Coaching is all about, connecting with the person and trying to say what they need in the moment. And you needed to be made fun of and have negative reinforcement, which is the only tool that I have, by the way. But it was awesome because I remember you shot that, and then it got a little western. We all went running up that hill. And then, finally, that was the trip at the end of it. We're like, what do you think, boys? Take the old smoke wagons out for a trip?
Yeah. That was a fantastic hog hunt because it was you, me, Barklow, John Barklow,
and Trevor.
Trevor. Yeah. So, and then we ended up doing the moose hunt again later, which hunt. Was.
I never saw a moose.
Man, I know. Neither. I mean, Barklow saw one. I saw one.
I would have shot the one had I seen it. Here's a question for you: What do you call two moose? I thought it was meese. Yeah,
I would say mooses. Yeah, I don't think that's right. Meesai. Yeah, let's go with meesai. I like that. So all this time, and this is this is like a great conversation for me because you're flying a private jet. You're a retired Navy SEAL. You're flying a private jet. You're working for CrossFit, and you just decided, you know what? I think I'm going to set a world record in here too somewhere. Just like, what was the genesis?
So I was working for CrossFit, and then one night I decided I didn't want to, so I quit and went from making money to having zero income overnight. And I started, surprisingly enough, I got a telephone call like 2 days later from my buddy, Steve Sanders, same guy that I was doing workouts with.
Yeah.
And he was definitely a mentor for me on the air side of the house when I was in the military. He was the JSOC free fall course director for a few years to include the basic course and the bundle course. So he called me. He's like, hey, I just started doing some contract work for a company that works with specifically the Air Force, getting PJ and CCT guys at the end of their pipeline. So they're done with their selection. I think they actually called it Green Team, and just to give them some additional training. So I started doing contracting for the Air Force and just going out and basic, like this is how you actually exit an airplane in flight, and working on body skills in the wind tunnel. And in doing so, Baker comes back into the story in Kill Cliff. So I started jumping the way that I wanted to jump, as opposed to the way that you are in the military. You just jump when you are told to jump. You don't really have, I couldn't base jump when I was in the military, and I got into that after I got out. I couldn't fly wingsuit in the military, so I got into that after I got out. And Baker was working with Kill Cliff at the time, and they were thinking of ways to raise money for the SEAL Foundation. And somehow the conversation came up about a wingsuit jump and trying to set world records. And I think Baker said, hey, would you be able to do that?
Right.
I was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. And that was in January, I think. And then in August, no, it was in November of the year before. And then August the next year, we did the jump in Davis, California. Mind you, when I told him that I could do that, we were actually in Boston. I had never actually put a wingsuit on. So they're like, hey, do you think you could beat the world record? I was like, yes, let's do it.
Yes.
And so then I started flying the shit out of a wingsuit and found some really good mentors and just trained really hard. And in, about a span of about 8 or 9 months, was able to go and throw the suit on and, pull it out of my ass, barely, but worked itself out.
What elevation?
36,500. And the airplane was,
and then
it was a Caravan, a highly modified Cessna Caravan. Yeah. And everything was stripped out of there except for the O2 bottle, the pilot, and the oxygen tech. And that airplane was at full speed, obviously, because the air, the air density is so much thinner. And I was wearing a ridiculously large suit at the time for my skill level and just completely got ragdolled going out the door, pulled that out of my ass, and then pointed my head towards the rising sun and just was hoping for the best and kind of just hummed my way along. No altimeter on, by the way, because it would have had to been external on my, the lift web. And I was wearing an O2 mask. And I thought, of course, in my mind, I'm like, well, given my luck, my O2 mask will somehow wrap around that. And I'll turn my head and rip my mask off at 30,000 feet. And then I'll turn it into a real shit show. So I'm like, I'll just wear 2 audible altimeters, one on each side of my helmet, right? What could possibly go wrong? I'll just set up these beeps so I'll know at what altitude I'm at. And it did work for a while. And then maybe I didn't hear the one at full altitude, but I had just gotten back not too long before then from a trip to Switzerland where I was base jumping, which is completely visual. So you get used to kind of judging distance based off your eye. I'm just flying along. And I was like, God damn, those trees are getting big. Like, I've had enough of this. I just flared up in the suit and pulled. And I was well under the USPA guidelines for main deployment altitude. And yeah, I don't know. Not the best.
So how far was it?
18.25 miles.
And then does that still stand today?
No, a Marine Corps aviator. I believe he's a helicopter pilot named Kyle Lopries. I think he beat it by like a half mile, something like that, or a quarter of a mile. Yeah.
Seriously. So how did you get a Guinness Book of World
Records? I would have had I filed for it. I never even filed for the records because, quite frankly, I didn't care. So the 2 records that I broke were absolute distance in free fall and then total distance in free fall and then absolute distance. So they add the canopy flight, even though it was relatively short afterwards. And I never filed for it because it was all based around fundraising. And I, quite frankly, could give 2 shits about having a Guinness Book of anything. So
how long were you in flight?
Just over 8 minutes of an isometric hold in a wingsuit. You there? I got you. Yeah, we're back.
You back? Yeah. So just over 8 minutes.
And I would equate it to go get just to make it easy for people to attempt, go get a 5-pound dumbbell and hold it in each hand at a 45-degree angle for 8 minutes. And that simulates a portion. A portion of what that felt like because your entire body, you're trying to make your body. If you look at an airplane, right, you do a cross section. There's all sorts of ribs and structural support. Well, your body is creating that inside of this nylon suit. So it's a good time.
So you're going to do it again, basically.
What I want to do is get a balloon that can go to 80,000 and get a partial pressure spacesuit and a big wingsuit and see if I can make it all the way across a state.
Oh, like a Baumgartner.
Yeah. But you would
like that type of a scenario?
You would get so much more free fall time than him because your horizontal distance and your vertical speed in a wingsuit. I can go up in my wingsuit for a short period of time. So you can really flatten out. Right. And if you're going for max glide, you're probably only falling at maybe 30, 40 miles an hour. So he broke the speed of sound with his body. Whereas you would be hauling ass the other direction.
Which is completely insane
for sure.
to me, by the way.
The speed of sound with the human body, which that guy's awesome. and he got into a spin and he got his way out of the spin. If you watch the documentary, they basically like hired a bunch of people from NASA, which is smart. And they had like this code word, and I forget what it was, but it was super innocuous. So they could say it over like the command center. And if they did say it, all of a sudden they were going to have technical difficulties with the video cameras. And you see him go into a spin and they shut the cameras off for a bit because it was about to get a little wild for him. Yeah.
Oh shit. Yeah. I didn't know that. I watched the documentary as well. And
So the guy, one of the main like mission control dude, like said the word that was basically like kill the feed.
Right. Well, didn't a guy from Google break that?
Yeah.
Right.
Very quietly.
Him? Yeah. Was it an executive from Google, or did you know anything
I think he was
that?
like top 3. There's a documentary on his as well. And so I'm pretty sure he had a tethered drogue behind him, whereas Felix went out totally slick. But either way, it doesn't matter. So if I remember correctly, he was like in his suit in like a horizontal position and got lifted to elevation and like hit a button. It's like, whee, here we go. But he definitely broke the height record for sure.
What do you know the height off the top of your head? Because it looks like they're almost out of atmosphere.
I don't know the height.
Point, right, they're at the edge of space. It's incredible. If you guys take a look at that, if you guys haven't seen that, you got to look it up. Just look the video up on YouTube. I think it was
the Red Bull Stratos project for Felix. I don't know the Google guy, but I know they made a documentary on both.
So what's next, Andy? What do you got going next? Are you getting back into? Are you doing more bass? I mean, I know you're getting way deeper and deeper into BJJ.
Yeah.
That's probably the big consuming thing for you, right? Are you trying to get your black belt?
I don't even care about the belt, to be honest with you. It's an interesting, and I have conversations with people about this because, there's belts and then there's stripes that go on the belts to kind of monitor your progress. And I see people that don't care about the belts, and then I see people who care a lot about the belts, and then every stripe in between. For me, I find it to be very challenging, equally mentally and physically, because you're trying to do a puzzle, but you're in a dryer at the same time, and somebody's lying on top of you. And I really like that. Right. And I enjoy it to the point where the belt around your waist, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, it's going to sort itself out. So will I eventually get a black belt? I have no idea. I have no intention of stopping. So it would just be a matter of continuing on until whenever that happens, but that's not a goal. So I'm definitely going to continue to do that. The jumping stuff, I don't know. My risk versus reward matrix has certainly shifted over the years. It takes a lot of time to be as safe as you can possibly be in those environments, which still leaves a lot of residual risk.
Right.
And I would rather dedicate that time to doing something that I enjoy that requires less risk. So I would say the two things I'm diving in on, we were talking about this the other day, is probably the podcast in addition to jiu-jitsu. I didn't realize how much I was going to enjoy it. I did not I didn't have like this MDMP process of, hey, I'm going to create a podcast and let me plan this whole thing out. I was like, well, I'm going to do this. And I got some recording equipment based off of a Google search and love it. I love doing it. I love sitting down and talking to interesting people. And so I'm going to dive in on that and increase the content offerings per week and signed the lease on a studio, going to try to professionalize that so it's more consistent. And if it can turn it into something that I can do full time, I can't imagine something I would enjoy more than sitting down and talking to fascinating people about how they were able to do those fascinating things.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think we continue to do more and more of these types of shows because everybody has their own way of interviewing people, their own piece of information they want to pull out. I've listened to quite a few different interviews with you, and I'm like, God, but they didn't really touch on you being a pilot, which we didn't really touch on that outside of, hey, man, you've done a lot of really interesting things in your life. And the thing that I've heard a lot of is,
which I will never be able to escape for the rest of my life, nor will you be able to escape the SFCIA moniker. And it just is what it is.
I've at least taken it off at this point on my Instagram handle. I've just taken it completely off. I just call myself.
I've never had anything SEAL related on my Instagram. I think it says skydiver base jumper. I've never,
right.
I don't know. I mean, I've come to the peace with it's always going to be a part of who I am. But if I'll brush up my resume from time to time, it's like 6 bullet points down.
Right. I think for me, it's more of I want people to judge me based on what I'm doing now, not necessarily what I've done in the past. And I don't need anybody to kind of say, well, he's a good guy, or, because he had a green hat. I've still got a green hat, actually.
That's your passive aggressive green beret. You just changed it to a green Richardson blank.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a blank Black Rifle hat. I like talking to people like you. I like spending time with you, which is, I'm happy that you're coming down tomorrow.
We're driving
off today. And then are you going to hunt elk in Montana this year? Are you going back to Utah?
I think that is, so I will have access to my general tag here in Montana. I think anything for non-residents, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I'd love to do the Alberta opener with Dudley, but I don't know if Canada is going to allow non-residents, non-citizens to cross the border to hunt. I'd love to hunt again in Utah. But who knows? I mean, I think a lot of those decisions are outside of my hands. So right now I know for a fact I'll have a bull and deer tag in Montana. But other than that, dude, I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of up in the air for us right now. I know that we're doing that one hunt in the fall here in Utah. I'm trying to get up to Idaho to get another hunt in, but we'll see. My cousin up there, he wants me to go to New Mexico with him. He's the bugler on Instagram. Him and Phelps, they make elk calls. So we're both from the same Orofino, Lewiston, Idaho area. So we're trying to put an elk hunt on in New Mexico. But to be honest with you, man, I love hunting. Like I could probably do it 250 days,
if not 275
easily. Yeah, if not 275, if not 300.
Yeah, or 325.
It's that selfish balance between getting out and spending time in the mountains and spending time with kids.
The hunt is only really what's captured. You see these hunting videos, like it's hard to describe to people. I mean, you'll walk on average, and you know this as well as anybody else, 10 to 12 miles a day, and that's a boring video. Oh, yeah. So it's like you'll do 5 to 7 or Dudley and I were on a stretch of 10 to 20 of those days. And then you'll encounter an animal. The time in physical investment is much larger than I think most people understand. And I'm actually at that same point. Like, I'm not a professional hunter. I'm just so fortunate to be friends with them. But it costs me money. Nobody's paying me to hunt. I am paying to go hunt. And I have to, like last year, I went a little bit buck wild. I'm like, okay, let's recalibrate my, fiscal allocation of funds towards hunting things as a hobby, and maybe focus on things that I could actually professionalize myself with, which isn't hunting. And I'll just enjoy the trips that I get with those people, but I'll be more selective in the trips that I take.
I'm trying to focus this year. I'm trying to really focus in on Utah specifically and getting way more out of Utah. I know that there are some incredible places that you just have to work a little bit harder to get into. I'm definitely going to have a depredation tag for cows. I know that there's plenty of those going out. And my goal this year is to get my wife on a cow elk. So, we're really kind of focused on this summer, really just kind of getting through this COVID pandemic bullshit that we're in, getting people back in the shops of retail, and then really just focusing hard on this fall so we can bring some large. I really do want to kill a big elk. It'll be my first big elk this year for an opportunity for one. So that's what I'm trying to do, But at the end of the day, if it has horns, it's going down. I mean, I'm not going to be too selective.
My only question ever, even with Dudley, I'm like, hey, is that legal? And if his answer is yes, it's like, I don't know how to measure animals for a trophy size. It's like, you walked out in front of me, it's legal. Like, let's put it on a plate. I don't care. Yeah.
Man, I had some bacon wrapped elk from the Traeger, bacon wrapped elk backstrap from the Traeger. It's quite possibly the most delicious thing I've ever eaten. The most delicious thing I've ever eaten. And those moose are amazing. The meat, the misai, they're amazing. Trevor and I were talking about it yesterday. I brought my moose hide. Actually, you got to see this thing. This makes for really good material. Look at this thing.
Sweet. What are you going to...
So I had my moose hide. I don't know. I just know that I wanted to
make a Speedo out of it.
And my idea, what I was thinking about doing was making some moose pants out of it, and then get it like a zebra vest,
and then wear it in the summertime.
And that's my hunting. That's my hunting attire for fall elk camp: moose pants, zebra vest, and I don't know why, because it's a natural camouflage. Zebra
should work.
So I think I'm fine. It should. I've thought my way through this.
Fucking moose hunting. I hope that your guys' freezers somehow lose electrical power and your meat goes bad.
I've got redundancy on it, so I'm not worried about it.
I hope that your house burns down, not with you in it, but with your meat freezer in it.
It's in the shop.
Burns down too.
All right. Well, so go check out Cleared Hot, Andy Stumpf, Cleared Hot. If you haven't seen his podcast, thanks a lot, man. We'll see you tomorrow. Going to go do some shed hunting, and then we'll have you back probably once a month, I guess.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm bringing the podcast gear. We're going to do a 30-minute Q&A.
Are you?
From the tailgate of the truck on generator power. It's no big deal.
Dude, I love it. I got some generator. I got a generator.
I have one too.
In the truck.
Mine's better than yours by 1%.
Okay. All right. Okay. You got it. I'll capitulate to that.
Yep.
All right, dude. Thanks a lot.